All right, so we are back here for part two of book one of Plato's Republic. Just to keep us caught up from where we were last time, we had basically two main characters that we're talking so far. We had Cephalus, who is the old man, and in his conversations, we got some pre understanding of some of the topics that we're going to see here in the Republic. We're going to see talks of justice. We're going to be seeing people discussing the gods and how they relate to the just man. And we also ran into Thrasymachus, who, well, I guess there was another discussion before that, but Thrasymachus took over the conversation because I think it was Glaucon that was talking before, or Polemarchus. And he's making the assertion that's going to follow us in the Republic for the rest of the book, that justice is the advantage of the stronger. And Socrates begins dismantling this definition in the beginning of, well, towards the end of the part that we just listened to in the last part. And he's going to continue doing so for another couple pages until Glaucon and Polemarchus pick up and begin to really unfold this definition in its full capacity. So, just for those who haven't followed us through the last one, we are reading Plato's Republic. We're in book one, part two, and we're listening to it. This is the Benjamin Jowett translation, and it is being read by a guy named Bob Neufeld, who read it on LibriVox. So this is the LibriVox recording, and you can go to LibriVox to actually get that recording and listen to it for yourself. So I'm going to be reading, or rather we'll be listening, and I will be adding my thoughts and trying to elucidate the passages as much as I can as we go through there. So that's what we're going to do. Let me find where we were in my book, because I was... Okay, great. So I found where we are, and I'm going to start playing from where we left off.
Book 1, Part 2 of the Republic by Plato. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. When we had got to this point in the argument, and every one saw that the definition of justice had been completely upset, Thrasymachus, instead of replying to me, said, "Tell me, Socrates, have you got a nurse?" "Why do you ask such a question," I said, "when you ought rather to be answering?" "Because she leaves you to snivel, and never wipes your nose. She has not even taught you to know the shepherd from the sheep." "What makes you say that?" I replied. "Because you fancy that the shepherd or neatherd fattens or tends the sheep or oxen with a view to their own good, and not to the good of himself or his master. And you further..."
All right, so here he's talking about, because before they were talking about doctors. Doctor was the big example, but they also talked about a pilot, in that a true doctor doesn't fix people for money. A true doctor fixes people because that's what doctors do. And Socrates was making this distinction between the benefit of the person doing the thing and the actual action itself. So here Thrasymachus is coming back and replying that people don't like a shepherd or a meat herd or neat herd, they take care of their animals, not because they really care about the animals, but because, well, eventually they want to either eat or sell them. And he's going to compare this to a ruler who in a city is really just taking care of people to benefit himself.
Further imagine that the rulers of states, if they are true rulers, never think of their subjects as sheep, and that they are not studying their own advantage day and night. Oh, no. And so entirely astray are you in your ideas about the just and unjust, as not even to know that justice and the just are in reality another's good. That is to say, the interest of the ruler and stronger, and the loss of the subject and the servant. And injustice the opposite. For the unjust is lord over the truly simple and just. He is the stronger, and his subjects do what is for his interests and minister to his happiness, which is very far from being their own. Consider further, most foolish Socrates, that the just is always a loser in comparison with the unjust. First of all, in private contracts. Wherever the unjust is the partner of the just, you will find that, when the partnership is dissolved, the unjust man has always more and the just less.
All right, so he's basically starting to begin this argument with the unjust and the just man. He's making a distinction between these two people. He's setting them both up next to each other, and that's actually going to happen more in earnest in the next book. But he's starting to create this distinction. So the unjust man, if he's in a partnership, they have an agreement, maybe they go into business together, is going to come out of that agreement in a better place because he's going to end up, stealing and cheating and taking what he wants. Whereas the just man isn't going to do those things and therefore is not going to get ahead in that way.
Secondly, in their dealings with the state, when there is an income tax, the just man will pay more and the unjust less on the same amount of income. And when there is anything to be received, the one gains nothing and the other much. Observe also what happens when they take an office. There is the just man neglecting his affairs and perhaps suffering other losses, and getting nothing out of the public, because he is just. Moreover, he is hated by his friends and acquaintances for refusing to serve them in unlawful ways. But all this is reversed in the case of the unjust man.
So he says here that a just person is actually going to be hated, especially when the just person has power, because people are going to expect him to, bend the rules for them. And if he's just, he's not going to do it, whereas the unjust man will do that.
I am speaking, as before, of injustice on a large scale, in which the advantage of the unjust is most apparent. And my meaning will be most clearly seen if we turn to that highest form of injustice in which the criminal is the happiest of men. And the sufferers, or those who refuse to do injustice, are the most miserable. That is to say, tyranny, which by fraud and force takes away the property of others, not little by little, but wholesale, comprehending in one things sacred as well as profane, private, and public. For which acts of wrong, if he were detected perpetrating any of them singly, he would be punished and incur great disgrace. They who do such wrong in particular cases are called robbers of temples, and man-stealers, and burglars, and swindlers, and thieves. But when a man, besides taking away the money of the citizens, has made slaves of them, then, instead of these names of reproach, he is termed happy and blessed, and not only by the citizens, but by all who hear of his having achieved the consummation of injustice.
Okay, so here he's saying that basically, if you're a petty thief, if you're just an unjust person that doesn't really do it all the way, like you just steal stuff or you just lie or just hit people at bars, then you're not going to be considered happy and you're not really going to be respected. But if you do a really good job, if you're really unjust, you become a tyrant. You become the sort of person who rules over others, and that is what Thrasymachus is saying should be sought after.
For mankind censure injustice, fearing that they may be the victims of it, and not because they shrink from committing it. And thus I have shown, Socrates, injustice, when on a sufficient scale, has more strength and freedom and mastery than justice. And, as I said at first, justice is the interest of the stronger, whereas injustice is a man's own profit and interest. Thrasymachus, when he had thus spoken, having like a bathman deluged our ears with his words, had a mind to go away. But the company would not let him. They insisted that he should remain and defend his position, and I myself added my own humble request that he would not leave us. Thrasymachus, I said to him, excellent man, how suggestive are your remarks! And are you going to run away before you have fairly taught and learned whether they are true or not? Is the attempt to determine the way of man's life so small a matter in your eyes, to determine how life may be passed by each one of us to the greatest advantage? And do I differ from you, he said, as to the importance of the inquiry? You appear rather, I replied, to have no care or thought about us, Thrasymachus. whether we live better or worse from not knowing what you say you know, is to you a matter of indifference. Pray thee, friend, do not keep your knowledge to yourself. We are a large party, and any benefit which you confer upon us will be amply rewarded. For my own part, I openly declare that I am not convinced, and that I do not believe injustice to be more gainful than justice, even if uncontrolled and allowed to have free play. For, granting that there may be an unjust man who is able to commit injustice either by fraud or force, still this does not convince me of the superior advantage of injustice, and there may be others who are in the same predicament as myself. Perhaps we may be wrong. If so, you, in your wisdom, should convince us that we are mistaken in preferring justice to injustice. And how am I to convince you, he said, if you are not already convinced by what I have just said? What more can I do for you? Would you have me put the proof bodily into your souls? Heaven forbid, I said. I would only ask you to be consistent, or, if you change, change openly, and let there be no deception. For I must remark, Thrasymachus, if you will recall what was previously said, that although you began by defining the true physician in an exact sense, you do not observe a like exactness when speaking of the shepherd. You thought that the shepherd, as a shepherd, tends the sheep not with a view to their own good, but more like a diner or banqueter with a view to the pleasures of the table.
All right, so in the previous argument, they were talking about a physician, and they were saying a physician is one who heals people, not one who makes money. However, with the shepherd, he's obviously conflating these two, and he's saying the shepherd is actually one who takes care of sheep for his own good, so that he could eat them or so that he could sell them and benefit from them. So that's what's being said here, and that's going to be played out going forward.
Or, again, as a trader for sale in the market, and not as a shepherd. Yet surely the art of the shepherd is concerned only with the good of his subjects. He has only to provide the best for them, since the perfection of the art is already ensured whenever all the requirements of it are satisfied. And that was what I was saying just now about the ruler. I conceive that the art of the ruler, considered as ruler, whether in a state or in private life, can only regard the good of his flock or subjects, whereas you seem to think that the rulers in states, that is to say, the true rulers, like being in authority. Think? Nay, I am sure of it. Then why, in the case of lesser offices, do...
This is going to be something that comes up later on as well. This idea that rulers want to rule, and basically what they come up with is that if you have a ruler that wants to rule, it's probably not going to be a good ruler, because ruling people is probably not an easy thing to do, and also if you're really desirous of the position, you're probably wanting it for something other than the inherent qualities of that position. You probably want it for either money or for fame or other things that being a leader can get you, and you don't want a ruler that is ruling for those reasons.
Men never take them willingly without payment, unless under the idea that they govern for the advantage not of themselves but of others. Let me ask you a question. Are not the several arts different by reason of their each having a separate function? And, my dear illustrious friend, do say what you think, that we may make a little progress. Yes, that is the difference, he replied. And each art gives us a particular good, and not merely a general one. Medicine, for example, gives us health, navigation, safety at sea, and so on. Yes, he said. And the art of payment has the special function of giving pay, but we do not confuse this with other arts, any more than the art of the pilot is to be confused with the art of medicine, because the health of the pilot may be improved by a sea voyage. You would not be inclined to say, would you, that navigation is the art of medicine, at least if we are to adopt your exact use of language? Certainly not. Or, because a man is in good health when he receives pay, you would not say that the art of payment is medicine? I should not. Nor would you say that medicine is the art of receiving pay, because a man takes fees when he is engaged in healing. Certainly not. And we have admitted, I said, that the good of each art is specially confined to the art? Yes. Then, if there be any good which all artists have in common, that is to be attributed to something of which they all have the common use. True, he replied. And when the artist is benefited by receiving pay, the advantage is gained by an additional use of the art of pay, which is not the art professed by him.
All right, so this might be a little confusing, this little conversation that just went on. But basically what he's trying to do, Socrates here, is trying to make a distinction between the art, the thing that a person is doing. When he uses the word art, think of job. So the job that someone has, whether they be a doctor, he uses the example of a pilot, which is someone who drives a ship, or a shepherd, or anything really. He tries to make a distinction between these positions and the other things that happen with them. So in this case, he's talking about pay. So a doctor isn't a doctor because he makes money, but a doctor does make money from what he does. Therefore, we have two different arts. And that one art is doing the doctor stuff, right? Fixing people's bodies is the art of the doctor. But there's a second art that's added on, which is like what we would call maybe like the business mind of things. Like if you have a business, you might be a good, I don't know, barber, but a terrible business person. So you're not good with money. You're not good at setting your prices. And so these separate arts are going to be significant as we go forward in the argument, because what Socrates is trying to say is that rulers in states are not doing it for their own benefit, and this distinction is going to be important going forward.
He gave a reluctant assent to this. Then the pay is not derived by the several artists from their respective arts. But the truth is that while the art of medicine gives health, and the art of the builder builds a house, another art attends them, which is the art of pay. The various arts may be doing their own business and benefiting that over which they preside, but would the artist receive any benefit from his art unless he were paid as well? I suppose not. But does he therefore confer no benefit when he works for nothing? Certainly he confers a benefit. Then now, Thrasymachus, there is no longer any doubt that neither arts nor governments provide for their own interests, but, as we were before saying, they rule and provide for the interests of their subjects, who are the weaker and not the stronger. To their good they attend, and not to the good of the superior. And this is the reason, my dear Thrasymachus, why, as I was just now saying, no one is willing to govern, because no one likes to take in hand the reformation of evils which are not his concern, without remuneration.
All right, so this is sort of the gotcha that Socrates has Thrasymachus in now. And one of the quotes that would be, if you're reading your book, you'd want to underline, is no one likes to take in hand the reformation of evils which are not his concern without remuneration. So no one would want to take in a whole bunch of people who are rowdy and lawless and try to, govern them without getting paid for it. And that means there's a separate element of this rule which involves pay, which Socrates is very keen to point out.
For in the execution of his work, and in giving his orders to another, the true artist does not regard his own interest, but always that of his subjects, and therefore, in order that rulers may be willing to rule, they must be paid in one of three modes of payment: money, or honor, or a penalty for refusing. What?
All right, here he's going to explain what this means, money, honor, or penalty.
Do you mean, Socrates? Said Glaucon. The first two modes of payment are intelligible enough, but what the penalty is I do not understand, and how a penalty can be a payment. You mean that you do not understand the nature of this payment, which to the best men is the great inducement to rule? Of course you know that ambition and avarice are held to be, as indeed they are, a disgrace. Very true. And for this reason, I said, money and honor have no attraction for them. Good men do not wish to be openly demanding payment for governing, and so to get the name of hirelings, nor by secretly helping themselves out of the public revenues to get the name of thieves.
All right, think about this for a second. If you have a ruler that is doing it for money or doing it for honor, then they probably already lack certain virtues, right? Because people aren't supposed to be really compelled by money or really compelled by these external things to do anything. So Socrates is going to argue here that the best rulers are those who basically rule because they don't have a choice. They've been compelled. And compel in this case means that they realize that there's actually no one that's going to do a better job than them. So they're like, all right, great, I got to do it. And then they do it.
And not being ambitious, they do not care about honor. Wherefore necessity must be laid upon them, and they must be induced to serve from the fear of punishment. And this, as I imagine, is the reason why the forwardness to take office, instead of waiting to be compelled, has been deemed dishonorable. Now, the worst part of the punishment is that he who refuses to rule is liable to be ruled by one who is worse than himself.
That's another good quote if you're underlining. He who refuses to rule, is liable to be ruled by one who is worse than himself. So if you know that you're the best person in a group to take the lead, and you don't, that means that you are allowing someone that is worse to take the lead, and you will be ruled by someone worse than yourself.
And the fear of this, as I conceive, induces the good to take office, not because they would, but because they cannot help, not under the idea that they are going to have any benefit or enjoyment themselves, but as a necessity, and because they are not to commit the task of ruling to any one who is better than themselves, or indeed as good. For there is reason to think that if a city were composed entirely of good men, then to avoid office would be as much an object of contention as to obtain office is at present. Then we should have plain proof that the true ruler is not meant by nature to regard his own interest, but that of his subjects, and every one who knew this would choose rather to receive a benefit from another than to have the trouble of conferring one. So far am I from agreeing with Thrasymachus that justice is the interest of the stronger. This latter question need not be further discussed at present. But when Thrasymachus says that the life of the unjust is more advantageous than that of the just, his new statement appears to me to be of a far more serious character. Which of us has spoken truly, and which sort of life, Glaucon, do you prefer? I, for my part, deem the life of the just to be the more advantageous, he answered. Do you hear all the advantages of the unjust which Thrasymachus was rehearsing? Yes, I heard him, he replied, but he has not convinced me. Then shall we try to find some way of convincing him, if we can, that he is saying what is not true? Most certainly, he replied. If, I said, he makes a set speech, and we make another recounting all the advantages of being just, and he answers, and we rejoin, there must be a numbering and measuring of the goods which are claimed on either side, and in the end we shall want judges to decide. But if we proceed in our inquiry as we lately did, by making admissions to one another, we shall unite the offices of judge and advocate in our own persons. Very good, he said.
This is sort of Socrates' description of dialectic, or this sort of dialogue that he likes to have, and this is sort of the reason that Plato uses dialogue as opposed to just writing essays, and that's that paragraph that we just listened to. And basically he was like, all right, if we just boom, 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 lay out all of our points, and then the other guy lays out all their points, you're going to need someone in the middle to say, okay, I think this guy's right, I think this guy's wrong, or to moderate between those points. But if they have a discussion and they go back and forth and they actually convince one another using arguments, then they don't need that third party to do anything. And that's one of Plato's reasons for using this form of philosophy.
And which method do I understand you to prefer? I said. That which you propose. Well then, Thrasymachus, I said, suppose you begin at the beginning and answer me. You say that perfect injustice is more gainful than perfect justice. Yes, that is what I say, and I have given you my reasons. And what is your view about them? Would you call one of them virtue and the other vice? Certainly. I suppose that you would call justice virtue and injustice vice. What a charming notion! So likely, too, seeing that I affirm injustice to be profitable and justice not. What else, then, would you say? The opposite, he replied. And would you call justice vice? No, I would rather say sublime simplicity. Then would you call injustice malignity? No, I would rather say discretion. And do the unjust appear to you to be wise and good? Yes, he said. At any rate, those of them who are able to be perfectly unjust and who have the power of subduing states and nations. But perhaps you imagine me to be talking of cut-purses. Even this profession, if undetected, has advantages, though they are not to be compared with those of which I was just now speaking. I do not think that I misapprehend your meaning, Thrasymachus, I replied, but still I cannot hear without amazement that you class injustice with wisdom and virtue.
All right, so here Thrasymachus is making the claim that justice is actually bad, and injustice is good. So those who are wise and virtuous are actually unjust.
And justice with the opposite. Certainly I do so class them. Now, I said, you are on more substantial and almost unanswerable ground. For if the injustice which you were maintaining to be profitable had been admitted by you, as by others, to be vice and deformity, an answer might have been given to you on received principles. But now I perceive that you will call injustice honorable and strong, and to the unjust you will attribute all the qualities which are attributed by us before to the just, seeing that you do not hesitate to rank injustice with wisdom and virtue. You have guessed most infallibly, he replied. Then I certainly ought not to shrink from going through the argument so long as I have reason to think that you, Thrasymachus, are speaking your real mind. For I do believe that you are now in earnest, and are not amusing yourself at our expense. I may be in earnest or not, but what is that to you? To refute the argument is your business. Very true, I said. That is what I have to do. But will you be so good as to answer yet one more question? Does the just man try to gain any advantage over the just? Far otherwise. If he did, he would not be the simple, amusing creature which he is.
All right, this line of argument is going to be maybe a little difficult to follow, so I just want to kind of give you the pre-rundown. He's talking about basically, is the just person ever going to try to take advantage of another just person? The answer is no. Is a just person going to take advantage of a non-just person? No. But the unjust person is going to be willing to take advantage of, defraud, cheat, both the just person and the unjust person. So keep that in mind as we go forward.
And would he try to go beyond just action? He would not. And how would he regard the attempt to gain an advantage over the unjust? Would that be considered by him as just or unjust? He would think it just, and would try to gain the advantage, but he would not be able. Whether he would or would not be able, I said, is not the point. My question is only whether the just man, while refusing to have more than another just man, would wish and claim to have more than the unjust. Yes, he would. And what of the unjust? Does he claim to have more than the just man, and to do more than is just? Of course, he said, for he claims to have more than all men. And the unjust man will strive and struggle to obtain more than the unjust man or action, in order that he may have more than all? True. We may put the matter thus, I said. The just does not desire more than his like, but more than his unlike, whereas the unjust desires more than both his like and his unlike. Nothing, he said,
when they say like and unlike, they're just referring to what a just person would want versus what an unjust person would want, depending on who they are. So the like would be what they are, the unlike would be the opposite.
Can be better than that statement. And the unjust is good and wise, and the just is neither. Good again, he said. And is not the unjust like the wise and good, and the just unlike them? Of course, he said. He who is of a certain nature is like those who are of a certain nature. He who is not, not. Each of them, I said, is such as his like is. Certainly, he replied. Very good, Thrasymachus, I said. And now to take the case of the arts. You would admit that one man is a musician and another not a musician. Yes. And which is wise and which is foolish? Clearly the musician is wise, and he who is not a musician is foolish. And he is good in as far as he is wise, and bad in as far as he is foolish? Yes. And you would say the same sort of thing of the physician? Yes. And do you think, my excellent friend, that a musician, when he adjusts the lyre, would desire or claim to exceed or go beyond a musician in the tightening and loosening the strings? I do not think that he would. But he would claim to exceed the non-musician? Of course. And what would you say of the physician? In prescribing meats and drinks, would he wish to go beyond another physician or beyond the practice of medicine? He would not. But he would wish to go beyond the non-physician. Yes.
All right, so he's using this argument of musicians and physicians, and he's saying that a musician who is skilled at doing what he does will want to, obviously, be better, be more proficient than the non-musician, and a physician would want to be better or more proficient than the non-physician. But a physician isn't going to try to be better than doctoring. You know, like a doctor can be better than maybe other doctors, but if we're thinking about the class as a whole, which is how they're speaking, the doctor isn't going to try to be more doctor. He's just going to try to be a doctor. And they're going to compare this to justice and injustice in just a second.
And about knowledge and ignorance in general. See whether you think that any man who has knowledge ever would wish to have the choice of saying or doing more than another man who has knowledge. Would he not rather say or do the same as his like in the same case? That, I suppose, could hardly be denied. And what of the ignorant? Would he not desire to have more than either the knowing or the ignorant? I dare say. And the knowing is wise? Yes. And the wise is good? True. Then the wise and good will not desire to gain more than his like, but more than his unlike and opposite. I suppose so. Whereas the bad and ignorant will desire to gain more than both.
Okay, so remember from earlier, they were discussing the just man who wants both more than the just man and more than the unjust man. And here, using this argument, he says that the wise person isn't going to try to get more than his like, only more than his unlike. And the ignorant person is going to try to get more than both. So this argument was the attempt to prove that the unjust man is not actually wise, he's actually ignorant.
Yes. But did we not say, Thrasymachus, that the unjust goes beyond both his like and unlike? Were not these your words? They were. And you also said that the just will not go beyond his like, but his unlike. Yes. Then the just is like the wise and good, and the unjust like the evil and ignorant. That is the inference. And each of them is such as his like is. That was admitted. Then the just has turned out to be wise and good, and the unjust evil and ignorant. Thrasymachus made all these admissions, not fluently as I repeat them, but with extreme reluctance. It was a hot summer's day, and the perspiration poured from him in torrents. And then I saw what I had never seen before, Thrasymachus blushing. As we were now agreed that justice was virtue and wisdom, and injustice vice and ignorance, I proceeded to another point. Well, I said, Thrasymachus, That matter is now settled. But were we not also saying that injustice had strength? Do you remember? Yes, I remember, he said. But do not suppose that I approve of what you are saying, or have no answer. If, however, I were to answer, you would be quite certain to accuse me of haranguing. Therefore, either permit me to have my say out, or if you would rather ask, do so, and I will answer very good, as they say to story-telling old women, and will nod yes and no. Certainly not.
This is something that happens a couple times in the dialogues where Socrates basically wins, and he wants to have finished the argument, but they're not really feeling like it because they've been embarrassed or disgraced. So they are going to conclude over the next page, 2 pages, and but we've kind of seen the fire go out of Thrasymachus for this one.
I said, if contrary to your real opinion. Yes, he said, I will, to please you, since you will not let me speak. What else would you have? Nothing in the world, I said, and if you are so disposed, I will ask, and you shall answer. Proceed. Then I will repeat the question which I asked before, in order that our examination of the relative nature of justice and injustice may be carried on regularly. A statement was made that injustice is stronger and more powerful than justice. But now justice, having been identified with wisdom and virtue, is easily shown to be stronger than injustice, if injustice is ignorance. This can no longer be questioned by any one. But I want to view the matter, Thrasymachus, in a different way. You would not deny that a state may be unjust and may be unjustly attempting to enslave other states, or may have already enslaved them, and may be holding many of them in subjection. True, he replied, and I will add that the best and most perfectly unjust state would be most likely to do so. I know, I said, that such was your position, but what I would further consider is, whether this power which is possessed by the superior state can exist or be exercised without justice or only with justice. If you are right in your view and justice is wisdom, then only with justice. But if I am right, then without justice. I am delighted, Thrasymachus, to see you not only nodding assent and dissent, but making answers which are quite excellent. That is out of civility to you, he replied. You are very kind, I said, and would you have the goodness also to inform me whether you think that a state, or an army, or a band of robbers and thieves, or any other gang of ill-doers could act at all if they injured one another? No, indeed, he said, they could not. But if they abstain from injuring one another, then they might act together better. Yes. And this is big.
All right, real quick. He's talking about a group of unjust people. He says a band of thieves or robbers. He basically says that if they're completely unjust, if they only do bad stuff, they're not even going to be able to get along. They're not even going to be able to function together in order to do the unjust things that they had planned.
Because injustice creates divisions and hatreds and fighting, and justice imparts harmony and friendship. Is not that true, Thrasymachus? I agree, he said, because I do not wish to quarrel with you. How good of you, I said. But I should like to know also whether injustice, having this tendency to arouse hatred, wherever existing, among slaves or among freemen, will not make them hate one another and set them at variance and render them incapable of common action. Certainly. And even if injustice be found in two only, will they not quarrel and fight, and become enemies to one another and to the just? They will. And suppose injustice abiding in a single person, would your wisdom say that she loses or that she retains her natural power? Let us assume that she retains her power. Yet is not the power which injustice exercises of such a nature that wherever she takes up her abode, whether in a city, in an army, in a family, or in any other body, that body is, to begin with, rendered incapable of united action by reason of sedition and distraction, and does it not become its own enemy, and at variance with all that opposes it, and with the just? Is not this the case?
So he's saying that when multiple unjust people are together, there's always going to be discord and fighting. And then he's going to make the argument that this is also true with the solitary unjust person. One unjust person can't even get his own will straight. He can't even agree with himself.
Yes, certainly. And is not injustice equally fatal when existing in a single person? In the first place, rendering him incapable of action because he is not at unity with himself, and in the second place, making him an enemy to himself and the just. Is not that true, Thrasymachus? Yes. And, oh, my friend, I said, surely the gods are just? Granted that they are. But if so, the unjust will be the enemy of the gods, and the just will be their friend. Feast away in triumph, and take your fill of the argument. I will not oppose you, lest I should displease the company. Well, then, proceed with your answers, and let me have the remainder of my repast. For we have already shown that the just are clearly wiser and better and abler than the unjust, and that the unjust are incapable of common action. Nay, more, that to speak as we did of men who are evil acting at any time vigorously together is not strictly true. For if they had been perfectly evil, they would have laid hands upon one another. But it is evident that there must have been some remnant of justice in them, which enabled them to combine. If there had not...
So the argument is that even with unjust people, if they're acting in tandem with other people, if they're working together, they must not be completely unjust, or they would have just, cheated and lied and been divided with those people as well.
Ben, they would have injured one another as well as their victims. They were but half villains in their enterprises. For had they been whole villains and utterly unjust, they would have been utterly incapable of action. That, as I believe, is the truth of the matter, and not what you said at first. But whether the just have a better and happier life than the unjust is a further question which we also propose to consider. I think that they have, and for the reasons which I have given. But still, I should like to examine further, for no light matter is at stake, nothing less than the rule of human life. Proceed. I will proceed by asking a question. Would you not say that a horse has some end? I should. And the end or use of a horse or of anything would be that which could not be accomplished, or not so well accomplished, by any other thing. I do not understand, he said. Let me explain. Can you see except with the eye? Certainly not. Or hear except with the ear? No. These, then, may be truly said to be the ends of these organs. They may. But you can...
All right, pay attention here. This is going to be maybe a little difficult to follow, but he's talking right now about a horse and an eye, and he's saying, or is it an ear at this point? He's saying that each of those things has a particular excellence and a particular end. So the end is what it's for, what it does. Ears hear, horses carry stuff around, eyes see. And each one can only do the thing that it's meant to do. An ear's not going to see, an eye's not going to carry stuff like a horse. And then he's going to talk about the excellence. And that is coming up here, and I will explain it when it happens.
Cut off a vine branch with a dagger or with a chisel, and in many other ways, of course. And yet not so well as with a pruning hook made for the purpose. True. May we not say that this is the end of a pruning hook? We may. Then now I think you will have no difficulty in understanding my meaning when I asked the question whether the end of anything would be that which could not be accomplished, or not so well accomplished, by any other thing.
So the end of the thing is basically what it's best used for. And if we are talking about tools, the tool with which something better can't be used. So to, cut paper, you're not going to find anything better than scissors.
I understand your meaning, he said, and assent. And that to which an end is appointed has also an excellence. Need I ask again whether the eye has an end? It has. And has not the eye an excellence? Yes. And the ear has an end and an excellence also? True. And the same is true of all other things. They have each of them an end and a special excellence. That is so. Well, and can the eyes fulfill their end if they are wanting in their own proper excellence and have a defect instead?
So the excellence here in the case of eyes is sight.
How can they, he said, if they are blind and cannot see? You mean to say if they have lost their proper excellence, which is sight. But I have not arrived at that point yet. I would rather ask the question more generally, and only inquire whether the things which fulfill their ends fulfill them by their own proper excellence, and fail of fulfilling them by their own defect. Certainly, he replied. I might say the same of the ears. When deprived of their own proper excellence, they cannot fulfill their end. True. And the same observation will apply to all other things? I agree. Well, and has not the soul an end which nothing else can fulfill? For example, to superintend and command and deliberate and the like. Are not these functions proper to the soul, and can they rightly be assigned to any other? To no other. And is not life to be reckoned among the ends of the soul? Assuredly, he said. And has not the soul an excellence also? Yes. And can she or can she not fulfill her own ends when deprived of that excellence? She cannot. Then an evil soul must necessarily be an evil ruler and superintendent, and the good soul a good ruler. Yes, necessarily. And we have admitted that justice is the excellence of the soul, and injustice the defect of the soul. That has been admitted. Then the just soul and the just man will live well.
All right, so when we're talking about the excellence and the end, he explains here, he says, the soul has an end which nothing else can fulfill. For example, to superintend and command and deliberate and the like. So the end of the soul is to do the stuff. When he says soul, he's talking about, your consciousness, your thinking. And so the soul is doing that thing, that's its end. But its excellence, he's arguing, is justice. So he's saying that if the thing, in this case the soul, doesn't have that excellence, it's not going to be able to fulfill its end. Therefore, the unjust soul, the unjust person, is lacking in the excellence that the soul requires. Therefore, he will be unhappy.
And the unjust man will live ill. That is what your argument proves. And he who lives well is blessed and happy, and he who lives ill the reverse of happy. Certainly. Then the just is happy, and the unjust miserable. So be it. But happiness and not misery is profitable. Of course. Then, my blessed Thrasymachus, injustice can never be more profitable than justice. Let this, Socrates, he said, be your entertainment at the Bendidia. For which I am indebted to you, I said, now that you have grown gentle towards me and have left off scolding. Nevertheless, I have not been well entertained, but that was my own fault, not yours. As an epicure snatches a taste of every dish which is successively brought to table, he not having allowed himself time to enjoy the one before, so have I gone from one subject to another without having discovered what I sought at first, the nature of justice. I left that
spoiler, the nature of justice is going to be what the rest of the book is about.
Inquiry, and turned away to consider whether justice is virtue and wisdom, or evil and folly. And when there arose a further question about the comparative advantages of justice and injustice, I could not refrain from passing on to that. And the result of the whole discussion has been that I know nothing at all. For I know not what justice is, and therefore I am not likely to know whether it is or is not a virtue. Nor can I say whether the just man is happy or unhappy.
All right, that is the end of Book 1. We've made it through Book 1. There are only 9 books to go. So I hope soon I will be able to pick up with Book 2. Keep an eye out for that. And of course, if you have any questions on what's been read already, leave them in the comments of this video. I will see them, and I will try to answer them on the next live stream that I do with The Republic, Book 2. Until then, we'll see you later.